Tonight, we'll be hearing from 4 star students of the most recent edition of the class. Again, if you have questions, please cursor down to the bottom of the screen. You'll see a button to click. We'll try to get to questions at the end of the hour. The first memoirist to read will be Debbie Takiff Smith. Debbie calls herself a lifelong English major. She's worked for many years as editor, writer, and writing teacher in the public and private sectors, and she's also the best damn big sister you'll ever find. Debbie, take it away.
Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Michael, and for your presentation tonight. My summer story is called My Life in Chocolate, or Ode to One I Have Loved. Chocolate, I love you in so many ways, in cake and in the icing on top, in ice cream smooth with cocoa, or in green or white ice cream with toothy bits of you, or with your old lover vanilla subtly blending, or holding pride of place on a wooden stick, with you enclosing her in a thin, hard shell that cracks and then softens as we become one. Or in pudding congealed in the pan that Mom let me scrape with spoon or finger after the rest was poured into 6 custard cups, 1 for each of us. Afternoons, visiting my grandmother, Nanny, she'd sit me in a chair and put in my small hands a custard cup of chocolate chips or M&Ms that I ate one by one. I'd save the red M&Ms for last. And I remember a 5-cent Hershey's milk chocolate bar, a quintessential American food in those days. When we were small, Mom made hot cocoa on cool mornings for us kids while Dad drank coffee. Into the cocoa, we dunked the stale rolls my Zeta brought from the bakery where he was a night watchman before he trudged up the stairs to his flat in the 2-family house where we all lived. Mom made our birthday cake favorite, chocolate cake, crumbly to the tongue and teeth, mainly an excuse for frosting. Lots of cocoa mixed with powdery cane sugar and milk in the early days. Then, as money got easier, creamed with butter too. As a young adult, I had a grad school housemate, Mona, who mined Chips Ahoy cookies. She'd break them apart to find the chips within, eat them with her hungry fingertips, and leave the crumbled cookie fragments on the table. In my 30s, when I rushed to and from work to feed the children, I sometimes mainlined those semi-sweet morsels straight from the yellow bag, not waiting for a cookie recipe to bake. A 4 o'clock Snickers bar got me through many long, sleepy afternoons at the office. Besides Mom and the American love of ice cream, my brother Howard is a main character in this story of chocolate love. On a family trip to Switzerland, he bought our daily jumbo bar after lunch or coffee, breaking apart luscious Swiss squares in shiny foil for his siblings, our mother, and her Israeli cousins. Howard chose a different bar each time, almond, marzipan. He bragged about high cocoa content. Milk chocolate at 50% cocoa was for the uninformed. The good stuff was 70% or 80% or even higher. When I'm in Italy, I love to examine tubs of gelato in their glass cases. Some shine brightly, colored by intense fruit. Others promise crunch of nuts. For me, gelato is just one more chocolate delivery system, not worth licking down to the cone unless there's chocolate, with hazelnuts, or Valrhona from South America, or deep, dark fondant. Chocolate? I even visited your birthplace, a chocolate jungle in Chihuahua, Venezuela, where we rode in the back of a truck past trees laden with big, heavy pods hanging down from the branches. We even saw people spread the beans on concrete to dry before collecting them for processing far away. Chocolate, you embody the perfect joining of bitter and sweet, like a well-lived life. Like tea or coffee, you offer a sense of alertness and well-being, especially as you pass the 70% mark. That's why I adopted Howard's habit, which I observed in Washington, Paris, and Caracas, of grabbing a piece of a big bar in the fridge on his way out the door in the morning. Better than coffee. or when necessary, better with coffee. I developed a Lent habit, stocking up at a local international grocery store when the 70% bars were on sale. After the company changed the recipe, it was never the same, and I had a better chance of resisting. The chocolate, eventually I realized, like a bad romance, it had to end. If I succumbed too late, you kept me awake at night, even when you came to me in Pepperidge Farm form, which seemed so benign. Then there would be arrhythmias, my heart pounding presto in reaction to your excitement, sleepless nights, abnormal heart rhythms, and eventually indigestion from late night snacking. I finally understood that it could not go on. The problems were so obvious. I should have seen them earlier. I needed to make a clean break. So I've tried to end our relationship, but you're there seductively on every restaurant menu, in every diner dessert case, at every supermarket or drugstore checkout counter. And of course, a walk down the candy or cookie aisle raises painful memories. Stop stalking me. Chocolate, I still care for you, but the heavy romance is off. We can visit now and then, perhaps when I happen to meet you in a brownie square at a party. I can look back with joy at our relationship, but please understand, I can only take you now in small doses. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Debbie. Next up will be Sylvia Weber. Sylvia moved to New York in 1968 and began her career in educational publishing. She's lived on the Upper West Side ever since and has been associated with Anshe Chesed since the mid-1980s. Most of her memoir writing recalls her childhood in Baltimore, but tonight she will tell the story of a more recent event. Sylvia, you're on.
Thank you, Michael. My story is called How I Spent My Summer Vacation. By early September, the renters at my friend Molly's vacation house in Bethany Beach, Delaware, had left, and she was able to invite me to visit her for a week. It would be a working vacation for both of us. As a nurse in the Maryland prison system, Molly traveled around the state, testing the guards for TB. She scheduled her annual trip to the prison in Salisbury to be able to commute from her beach house while the weather was still warm. She would drive to work before dawn and be back at the beach house by early afternoon. I had brought a freelance editing assignment to work on while Molly was away. The project wasn't due for several weeks, so I could spend just an hour to a day on it. I could sleep as late as I pleased, help myself to breakfast, read a trashy novel, and if I wanted to, walk to the beach for a morning swim. Mainly, I could feel carefree. But first, I had one time-sensitive task to do on Monday. That was to call Ticketmaster to reserve seats at the State Theater for a special summer Sunday performance of my favorite opera, Mozart's The Magic Flute. I love the pageantry, the fantasy with its happy ending, and of course, the music. I had seen Ingmar Bergman's enchanting movie and had heard recordings, but this was my first opportunity to see the opera live. I wanted to have tickets before they sold out. What should have been a quick transaction wound up taking more than an hour. The disembodied voice on the phone told me which number to press for every entertainment venue, from Madison Square Garden to Shea Stadium to Carnegie Hall, except for the State Theater. Finally, I pressed O to speak to an agent. She must have been new to her job. I had to explain that the New York City Opera was performing at the State Theater and that Ticketmaster sold tickets for this show. Only then could I relax, knowing that my vacation would end on a high note. On Tuesday, Molly made her pre-dawn commute, and I made a point of sleeping late so that I would be fully rested when I put in my hour of work. I set out my manuscript and reference materials and then turned on the radio to the local PBS station for some background music. What I heard instead was an updated version of War of the Worlds. A plane crashed into the North Tower at 8:45 this morning, said the newscaster, followed by a second plane hitting the South Tower 18 minutes later. He went on to report the collapse of the towers, an attack on the Pentagon, and the downing of a fourth plane in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I was surprised that the PBS station in Delaware had readings of fiction instead of music, but I didn't want to look for another station. The reception was not that good, and I already knew that the commercial stations didn't offer anything I wanted to listen to. So I returned to the table and started to read. But then the announcer explained, for those who just tuned in, that regularly scheduled programming was being preempted to bring listeners all the shocking developments as soon as they could be confirmed. I felt myself slump into the chair as I finally understood that what I was hearing was real. Molly came home about an hour later, and we spent the rest of the day in a haze of disbelief. We learned that the Red Cross was setting up bloodmobiles in some beach towns and drove to the nearest one. By the time we arrived in the church parking lot, the bloodmobile had left. A passerby told us that so many donors had appeared that the bloodmobile had run out of supplies. The rest of my visit was a blur. We did go to the beach and we made leisurely dinners, but we spent more time listening to the news and trying to call friends and family to make sure everyone was safe. At first, connections along the East Coast were all jammed up. The only way I could contact my son, who was living in Jersey City, was through Molly's daughter in Texas, who got through to him and then reported that he was safe at home. Just a week before, he'd been laid off from a job right in the World Trade Center area. When the second tower collapsed, he witnessed the disaster from his bedroom window. I reached him later that night and also managed to have a conversation with my boyfriend who was cat-sitting at home. Molly was able to check in with all her children and their families for some peace of mind, even though none of them were in danger. However, her youngest son's girlfriend had two aunts who worked at the World Trade Center. One aunt survived because she had decided to attend morning mass before going to her office. The other perished. On Saturday morning, Molly drove me to the bus station in Ocean City, Maryland. I arrived home in time to contact the art gallery where my cousin from California was in a group show scheduled to open that evening. The opening did go on. Afterward, my cousin had a reception in her hotel suite. It was a somber party with guests telling each other their 9/11 stories and speculating on what would happen next. The performance of the Magic Flute went on too. The State Theater, like most of the other entertainment venues, was following the mayor's advice. Press on with normal activities as much as possible to deny the terrorist supporters the satisfaction of completely upheaving our lives. I met my son at the theater. We picked up our tickets and found our seats with time to spare. Before the first note of the overture, the director came on stage, along with all the performers in their costumes, the stagehands, and everyone else affiliated with the opera company. Only the orchestra was in its normal place in the pit. The director announced that one of the stagehands was the son of a firefighter who had retired sometime before the attack, and that a large American flag had been presented to the family at the father's funeral. That flag was then unfurled from the proscenium arch. As the orchestra struck up the Star-Spangled Banner, everyone on stage and in the audience joined in the singing. The house lights were dimmed, so no one could see me, but I was still embarrassed by the tears rolling down my cheeks. I managed to regain my composure as the performance began. And with that performance, my own recovery began too. Watching a battle between good and evil, even knowing it was a fantasy, I was uplifted as I witnessed the good guys triumph. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sylvia. Our next memoirist is Sheila Lewis. Sheila is an author, curriculum writer, and editor for educational organizations. She runs book clubs and teaches writing workshops and meditation. She's lived on the Upper West Side forever with her husband and too many books. Their sons have grown up in Anshe Chesed. Sheila, take it away.
Thank you, Michael, and everyone. So tonight I'm reading a story that's part of a longer work dedicated to my mother, my aunts who swarmed around her, and their unsung influences on generations, the family, and my life. My mother, Ruth Kaufman, died in March, the weekend before COVID locked down New York. After reciting the morning Kaddish early in the mornings, I would take masked walks in Central Park. I started to hear my mother's clear voice in my head in the shade of the pine trees or by the pea-soupy duck pond. It was a gift, and then suddenly my 8 aunts began to intrude on my quiet time with Mom, showing up in an avalanche of words, whispers, and squabbles. I had no idea what to do with this clamorous pack. Somehow, with Mom gone, the last of her great generation, it seemed like she and my aunts wanted to tell their stories, and they deserved to. As I jotted down notes, themes began to emerge, including roigus, the Yiddish term for feuds, disputes of known or unknown origin. Who knows, maybe I was exorcising some murky karma from their graves. My father, Morris, had 4 sisters and my mother 3 and a sister-in-law. At first, I didn't know whom to begin with, but bossy Aunt Stella made the choice easy. Stella, a year and a half older than my mother, lived in West Hempstead, the same Long Island town as we did. Larger than life, Stella towered over her sisters, Ruth, Millie, and Esty. A powerful swimmer, Stella saved my mother's life twice from drowning, a fact neither of them ever forgot. It wasn't just Stella's size that could squelch the air out of a room, it was also her personality. She was the aunt who, when she asked you for a hug, you wanted to run out of the room. Stella and Ruth had a love-hate relationship close sisters share. They bonded best when discussing the messes their 2 other sisters had created in their choices of husbands. On Saturdays, starting when I was in 5th grade and throughout high school, I would walk down Hempstead Avenue to Aunt Stella's and Uncle Bernie's for afternoon tea. The 15-minute walk was a relief after a long morning in shul services and a big lunch at home. Mom had gone to all that trouble to set a proper Shabbos meal. Tea in a Sabbath-observant household was an extension of a meal that went on for hours. So whenever I finished lunch and headed to Aunt Stella's was just fine. Hers was a boisterous household, full of boys, my cousins, Sam, Eddie, and Neil. Their older sister, Rhonda, liked having me around, but if I came with my sister, Toby, 3 years older than me, she and Rhonda would shut me out and I was forced to join the boys in whatever boisterous game they were playing. Battleship, Clue, Life, you know, the game with the little toy cars and plastic people. But first, Stella would snag me into the kitchen for a taste of noodle kugel or cholent, the burnt meat, bean, and potato stew that smelled of Shabbos because you had to cook it overnight on a burner you weren't allowed to turn off until after sundown. I was afraid of cholent. It's so heavy, my mother would say of the dish. Her 4 skinny children ate like birds, while Stella's carnivorous crew could polish off a whole roast or chicken in one sitting. I try to refuse the cholent while eyeing Stella's famous chocolate nut brownies. I'm really full. Oh yeah? What'd you have for lunch? Oh, just some leftovers. Stella would press on until she was satisfied hers was the superior meal. By then, I'd have tasted a bit of the brown mush just to move on to the brownies. I joined the games being played in the den. Friends would trickle in. We'd talk and play and nosh until the first stars of the night appeared, signaling the end of Shabbos. These endings always left me melancholy, wanting the magic of an afternoon that stretched for miles and brought people and food together and to last longer. I'd linger after the house was emptied of the mob and the dishes were cleared. The rooms had an early American decor with warm blue furnishings, dark wood, and plants and planters circled in macrame crafted by my aunt. Stella taught arts and crafts and liked to discuss her latest work. I'm so excited about this new piece. What do you think? She'd ask. Even though the 4 dancing Hasidim, Jewish men in tights, made of plaster of Paris, looked exactly like the sculpture she'd shown me the week before, I'd praise it to the hilt, flattered that Stella had asked my opinion. Perhaps I was more taken by her enthusiasm than by her talent. After more art gazing, there would be some back and forth as to who would drive me home. It was too dark to walk. If Bernie was dozing in his chair, I'd call Mom. If Dad showed up instead, there was a chance that Ruth and Stella weren't on speaking terms. We're not fighting, I just have to keep my distance, Mom would say in a frosty tone. Whatever they fought or didn't fight about was a mystery to me. After a few weeks, the ice would thaw to a light grudge that would linger like faded perfume. Ruth would find an excuse, a holiday or some occasion coming up, and call Stella. 2 sisters were caught in an extended case of sibling rivalry. Stella was the athlete, but Ruth was prettier. Stella's house abutted the main avenue in town with the hum of the June Claire dance school at her back door. Our house folded lushly into our neighbor's arboretum of a yard, complete with a showcase of fake reindeer drawing a real sled at Christmas time. Mama would insist she was never jealous of Stella. She's a social butterfly. I don't need people around me all the time. Ruth, an introvert. Stella, an extrovert. Stella would allude to Ruth's being their mother's favorite, but it didn't add up. Ruth was shy and not blessed with the creative talents of her 3 sisters. Her mother, Sadie, felt sorry for her, I concluded, because Ruth didn't sing, act, dance, or crochet. Mom did find her talent later in life, becoming a social worker, lending her excellent ear, good heart, and sound sense to helping families in need. Ruth and Stella did not extend their rivalry to offspring comparisons. They were both doting aunts. Stella introduced Toby to her husband of 50 years. Mom upped her ante by always being available to talk to Stella's boys and to have tea with Rhonda after Stella died 12 years ago on Shavuot. For Mom, Shavuot, the holiday of revelation, was a parallel trauma. Her father died on the same day as Stella years earlier. He was sitting in the lobby of a Catskills hotel with my cousin Rhonda and keeled over. Today we'd call it broken heart syndrome. His beloved Sadie had died 2 months earlier. Mom took Stella's death by stroke hard. After Mom's death, I felt moved to get to the root of their broigus, their feuds, to clear the ancestral air, to give each a final word. Stella was like a hailstorm that hit the backyard and knocked over a tree. You knew the tree would grow back, but it would take some time. A broigus with Stella was stormy, usually over a slight Mom would describe as out of proportion to reality. She never takes responsibility. She never admits she's wrong, she'd say. I'd nod my head as Mom would vent. I wouldn't say a word until she would thank me for whatever advice I didn't give. This one way would be repeated with my siblings. Dad chalked up Mom's upsets as having to do with women's innate inferior intelligence, hormones, and mood disorders. If the mere hint of a broigus brewing rose in his presence, Morris left the room. Stella departed this world abruptly, though on good terms with Mom. Despite their ups and downs, Mom admired much about Stella. She could swim, ski, and knit. Stella loved telling a good tale more than the truth of it, and I was her devoted listener. With so much alike, she'd say in her gravelly voice, free spirits, artists. Stella made me feel proud, if a little disloyal to Mom. It balanced out because Rhonda adored Ruth. This past pandemic Shavuot, rather than whispering in my ear to tell her story, I felt like Stella barged in. I thank her for teaching me about art and having fun, even when life was hard. She never got a chance to let go of all her emotional baggage and petty grudges. I hope this story can lighten her load. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sheila. Our final memoirist of the evening is Jack Rosenbaum. Jack has been a member of Anshe Chesed since marrying Renee Barocas at the Shul 10 years ago. After graduation from an Orthodox day school, Jack became a structural engineer and worked on the lunar module and the F-14 for Grumman Aerospace. He later transitioned to software engineering and had a business that developed and marketed business software. He and his wife have 12 grandchildren between them. Jack, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Michael. My early years. I'm in my 83rd year, in good health, filled with pride and gratitude for an interesting, productive life. I want to convey those feelings to my offspring. Memoir seems the best way. It all started when I became part of the Jewish nation and was given the name Jacob David, son of Isaac Leib and Tzipporah. That was on April 14th, 1938, on the 8th day after I was born. I don't remember the bris, but my father loved big parties. So the event must have been memorable. When I was an adult, I shopped on the Lower East Side where my father conducted his business. When I identified myself, store owners would say, I was at your bris. In the days before credit cards, getting credit or the wholesale price was never a problem. My manual skills and the ability to work with tradespeople I inherited from my mother, Tilly. As a young woman during the Depression, her education was limited to elementary school. She helped support her family working in the needle trades. Her native talents, however, were quite impressive. She could design and sew dresses and hats, plan and manage construction projects, and run a business. Her social skills were unmatched. Within a few minutes interacting with strangers, she knew all about them and had established a friendly relationship. When I was 2, my parents separated or divorced. I was never sure which. Their backgrounds were different. His family was religiously observant, hers secular. As a result, many rules regarding religious observance at home were imposed at the instigation of his mother, Frimit. Conflict was inevitable. And in a heated moment, my father struck my mother. My mother and I left and moved in with her parents in a 1-bedroom apartment in Bensonhurst. My father moved in with his family in Borough Park. Weekdays I spent with mom and grandparents, weekends with dad and his family. At about the age of 4, I attended a yeshiva preschool. My father took me each morning, and my mother picked me up in the afternoon. Summers, I went to camp. They visited me together. When I was 6, my father's mother passed away. My parents got together again, and we lived in a large 2-bedroom apartment on Linden Boulevard near Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn. I transferred to Crown Heights Yeshiva, an Orthodox day school, where Hebrew was taught until lunch and English in the afternoon until 4:30. When I was 13, a series of coinciding events helped form my future life. The first was my bar mitzvah. As expected, I was able to lead services, read from the Torah, and give a speech. My parents, as expected, threw a huge catered event, gowns, tuxedos, and all. I got lots of gifts, mostly cash, which my parents collected. Little did I know, the money went to finance my mother's next project, Holmes Country Lodge, our bungalow colony near Pauling, New York, which became my annuity. After my parents got back together, we spent many summers at Catskill hotels. Eventually, my mother decided to try a rental in a bungalow colony. After experiencing the bungalow colony, my mother decided she wanted to own one, but not in the Catskills. Through a friend in Lake Carmel, we found a 70-acre wooded property in Holmes, New York. She made the purchase just weeks after my bar mitzvah. I still have the map and deed. There were a 2-story farmhouse, a barn, 4 buildings, and 2 rental units each. And added 4 buildings with 2 rental units each. That became my mother's project. She hired local tradespeople, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and excavators to do the work. I tagged along and learned about the various trades. We also purchased a Model A Ford truck. Because it was registered as a farm vehicle, I could drive it to local stores without a license at the age of 13. Between April and July, we created a 20-unit colony and started renting to our friends. The skills I acquired remain with me to this day. At about the same time, after completion of 8th grade at Crown Heights Yeshiva, I faced a crossroads in my life. Go with my friends to Yeshiva High School, the Talmudical Academy, or go to Brooklyn Technical High School. I wanted to be an engineer, chose tech, and started my first term. A few months later, I attended Simchat Torah services at Chabad on Eastern Parkway. I went with my friends. A rabbi I knew spent a long time trying to convince me that Talmudical Academy was the only path to take, even though I had already started at Tech. I spent a sleepless night and was ready to switch. But in the morning, my higher power sent my secular mother to wake me up. Engineering won out. After 65 years, that event and all the details remain in my mind. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jack. Wow, that's a terrific group of readers and terrific storytellers. We have just a few more minutes. I'll ask a general question for the panel. I'll go around and ask why it is that you are writing memoirs. What do you get out of looking back at your life and writing about it? Let's start with Sheila. Or Sheila, are you there?
I'm here. Yes. Hi. I love memoir because to me, I love history. And I also think that with memoir, you can use your imagination to fill things in that sound real, like they really happened. And there's something about giving voice to people who might not have had that voice. And that's what I started to do with what I'm writing. And it's just a great form for story. So that's why I like memoir.
Sylvia.
I had this thought this afternoon that Memoir writing is a quintessentially Jewish activity, not exclusively a Jewish activity, but something that we naturally do from the time we started retelling the story of the Exodus at our Pesach Seders. So I think, it kind of came naturally. And I also relish the stories my parents told me of their youth. And I think that's the way we pass on history to future generations. So it's fun.
Jack, your thoughts?
As I get older, I find my past by looking at photo albums and trying to reconstruct things. I wish my parents had organized them better and in chronological order. Before I forget, I wish, and I have time to spare, I would like to pass my history on to my children and my grandchildren. Memoir seems the best approach.
Debbie?
Well, at my age, I look back at various aspects and periods of my life, and I try to make sense of them. I try to make meaning. And I find that doing the work itself can be very engaging. And I sometimes reach a sense of flow, of really being engaged in the task. Also, by writing down the stories, my life seems more real to me in some way. And I hope that writing such stories and my history will make my life seem in some ways more real and meaningful to others who read the stories, including my family and their friends.
All right, thanks, Debbie. There is one question a gentleman has posed, and it's a bit of a long question and it's a complicated answer. I'll just answer it briefly right now, and then if this questioner wishes to contact me via my website, I can give a more detailed answer. David Shapiro asks, in Ken Burns' documentary, one reporter says that he's sick and tired of hearing that the World War II vets were the greatest generation because from where he sat, it was the Vietnam vets who faced the greatest challenges, and they were unfairly tarred by those in the early 70s who took drugs and didn't listen to orders. Your thoughts? And if you can switch the screen to me. Hello?
Yeah,
You're on.
I am on. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm seeing everyone else. My mistake. It's a great question. Because the war ended, the outcomes of the two wars were so different, we tend to look at the two generations of veterans differently, even though they both went through the horrors of combat. They both lived with the horrors for decades. They both suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. They both lived with nightmares. But the World War II veterans won. And the Vietnam veterans didn't. They fought the first war that America lost. And when they came home, as the war continued and continued without a positive resolution, I think they were treated as the closest representative of the war, this war which was a subject of shame for the American people. Our nation had failed. Our citizens had failed, not only our government. And that's why the Vietnam veterans were treated as they were. And it wasn't just the general populace. A veteran in my book, a gentleman named Michael Mace, an infantryman from Indiana, farm boy, and a friend of his, a fellow Vietnam vet, after they'd come home, went to a VFW hall, and there were some World War II vets there. And they said, what's the matter with you guys? We won the big one, we won ours. What the hell happened to you? So I think our society tended to look at Vietnam veterans as just a bundle of symptoms when they were human beings just like their fathers who served in World War II. And we talk about PTSD. Listen, I interviewed a gentleman from a World War II submariner, and he was on a submarine that was sunk in 1941 or 42. I interviewed him in the year 2000 or 2001. He still had nightmares of that ship sinking 60 years later. And he said he woke up just before he was about to drown every night. Well, that's about all we have time for. So we'll wrap up. If anyone is interested in taking the memoir workshop, please, or anyone who has any further questions, please contact me via Josh or via my website, again, michaeltakiff.com. This session of the workshop is over, but perhaps we'll hold another session in the fall and winter. Now, coming attractions. Next Monday, July 27th at 8 p.m., please return for a stimulating hour with Michael Wise, publisher of New Vessel Press, and one of his authors, Anna Goldenberg, coming to you live from Vienna, Austria. Her book, I Belong to Vienna, is billed as a defiant memoir from contemporary Europe. Also in the program will be scholar and author Dr. Nancy Sinkoff, reading from her book, From Left to Right, Lucy Davidovich and the New York Intellectuals, Lucy Davidovich, the New York Intellectuals, and the Politics of Jewish History. And the following week, on August 3rd, Sheldon Lewis will host the season finale with veteran journalists Jeremy Kaplan and Dan Friedman, who will discuss entrepreneurial journalism and the challenges specific to Jewish journalism in our changing world of digital media. Thank you to all the readers. Thank you all for attending tonight's program. On behalf of Anshe Chesed and all the readers you've heard this evening, I'm Michael Takiff, wishing you a good night.